Hi, I'm Capt Frank Lanier, a retired Coast Guard officer and SAMS Accredited Marine Surveyor with over 40 years of experience in the maritime and diving industry. I've amassed literally thousands of photos of all the bad things I've found on boats during my career as a Marine Surveyor. So what we're going to do today is take a look at some of my favorites. We're going to take a look at each picture. We're going to discuss why they're evil, and we're going to discuss what you need to do to correct it. So hop in, buckle up, keep your arms and legs inside the car at all times as we take a carnival-like ride tour through the cavalcade of owner-induced perversions that I like to call Capt Frank's Sea Chest of Horror. Sea Chest of Horror. So this photo here shows a stuffing box on a mid-sized powerboat, and if you look at it closely, you can see the stuffing box to the right. And then to the left, you have the fiberglass tube, and what that's called is the shaft log. And that is what the shaft log hose clamps to join the shaft log to the stuffing box. If you look close, you'll notice there is a difference in diameter between the stuffing box and the shaft log. It's probably about an inch overall. However, what the owner has done here is he has used the same diameter of hose that would fit the stuffing box, and he's just put it on the shaft log, and he's just kind of squished it down there with the hose clamps in an effort to kind of try and Frankenstein it all together. Now, you would, if you did this in a correct way, you would have to have an adapter of some type, or a transition point to properly join these two different diameter pieces of gear. The way it is right now is, is it going to seal properly? Well, no, it's not. And that's the reason he's got the rag underneath it. It's dripping profusely. And for the life of him, he couldn't understand or figure out, why is this thing leaking all the time? I just don't understand it. So I had to explain to him, well, yeah, the reason it's leaking because you have two different diameter pieces of equipment, the stuffing box and the shaft log, and you're trying to join them with the same diameter piece of hose. Just not going to work. So here we have an example of where the owner has removed a piece of gear. In this case, it was a generator that has failed, and hey, that generator, it's failed and it's expensive and I don't want to replace it. So we're just going to rip it out of there. And that's what we go to the right where that piece of carpet is. So as part of the deinstallation, we got this through hole over here to the left, and we're just going to cut that hose and we're just going to leave it there. I mean, it's all right. I shut the Seacock. So the things that are wrong with this, of course, if you're going to disconnect a piece of gear, not only do you have to remove the hose here, the raw water coolant hose to the generator, for example, you take that piece of hose off and you got to plug or cap that Seacock down there. And while we're on the area subject of the Seacock, take a look at that. It is a gate valve. And the valve, if you look at the handle's rusty and damaged. Gate valves are notorious for failing. Just the internal guts of them are prone to corrosion. And unlike a real Seacock, which has a 90-degree arc of operation, you can't look at that Seacock there, that gate valve, and tell whether it's open or closed. So the recommendation here would be, if you're not going to use that thing, at least cap it properly. Put a plug in there, a bronze plug in there to cap it. And if you're not going to use it, ideally remove the through hull and glass over it during your next haul out. So here's a picture that shows just because you can do something, that doesn't mean you should do it. So we've got a through hull and a Seacock, got a nice bronze Seacock down there. And the owner has tried to, what he's doing here is, this is a raw water intake for an engine. And he wanted a way to flush the system, but primarily he wanted an easy way to winterize the system. So he put this T-fitting in here, and when it gets time for him to winterize, all he has to do is unscrew the plug at the top, screw in a tailpipe, connect the hose to it, and then he can winterize the raw water or open side of the system by pumping in, the non-toxic pink antifreeze that you always see, at the Walmart, particularly during the winter. So the problem here is that he used galvanized steel fittings, right? This is the kind of stuff you get at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever. It is definitely not suitable for use in the marine environment. As you can tell, you can see the corrosion and stuff. He's used a little coupling section to connect the T to the bronze Seacock, and it's just, you can see right here that this is, not the proper material. Plus, you don't want to mix these materials because they have different expansion, contraction ratios, but primarily because this galvanized mild steel is just going to corrode, and one day this thing's going to just rot right off and probably sink the boat. So the recommendation, of course, here would be, if you want to do this conflagration that he's got here, use the proper materials. Use bronze instead of this galvanized stuff that he's, bought at the big box store. So what we have here is a good example of gelling. Well, it's antifreeze gelling is what it is. And it is due to an improper ratio of antifreeze to water. And just to give you a little bit of background info, most engine manufacturers recommend a 50-50 mix of antifreeze and water for optimum year-round protection. This 50-50 mix provides freeze protection to down around minus 34 degrees Fahrenheit and boil-over protection to around 228 degrees Fahrenheit. A more concentrated solution of glycol, which is the antifreeze, will increase the freeze protection, but it also reduces the coolant ability, while a more diluted mixture reduces corrosion protection. The only way to verify that you have a proper ratio of antifreeze to water is to measure the concentration of antifreeze with a floating ball gauge, hydrometer, or test strip, or refractometer. Simply opening up the reservoir cap and dumping an extra, dollop of antifreeze in efforts to increase freeze protection, or as the owner stated here, to freshen things up and add a little bit of strength to my antifreeze. Okay, so what the problem is, when you just dump, antifreeze in there without checking the mix and stuff, you can exceed this 50-50 mixture. When you exceed it by about 80% concentration of antifreeze, it can cause silicate gelling, and that's what we have here. This is where the silicate corrosion inhibiting additives found in most antifreezes drops out of suspension, forming a greenish goo that clogs the system and reduces heat transfer. If gelling occurs like this right here, the system not only has to be drained, but fully flushed before adding new, properly mixed coolant. And if you want to learn all that you ever want to know about coolant and antifreeze and all that good stuff, check out the link below. It's right there, right below there, that leads to my article on the chemistry of coolant. So what we have here is a vacuum tank for a vacuum flush type marine toilet. And this is the vacuum tank here. And, it looks okay. The guys did a pretty good job. He's got it nicely secured. He's got it strapped down, bolted to the bulkhead. Well, the problem is this isn't a bulkhead. This is the hull of the vessel. And he didn't bolt it. He put 4-inch long screws in it. So if you look on the hull outside of this area, which I did, of course, when we did the hull out, there's like 3 or 4 inches of screw protruding from the side of the hull. So this guy he just screwed this thing in right through the hull. So of course, this is not conducive to keeping your hull in good condition or preventing water intrusion through the hull. So this is what you got. You got to, when you drill holes and drill put screws in, you got to make sure you know what's on the opposite side. If it's not the external or exterior of the hull, it could be, pipes, hoses, or anything else. So what we're looking at here is a life raft. This is a life raft that's in a well of a larger catamaran. And the purpose of this well, of course, is to keep the life raft out of harm's way, keep it secured, and also in a place where it can be easily deployed. Now, life rafts will typically have what's called a hydrostatic release mechanism, and what that is if the vessel was to sink when it gets to a certain depth, typically 15 feet or so, the hydrostatic release mechanism would then cut the securing straps or whatever's holding the life raft in place and allow it to float free. The problem with this installation is that the owner has lashed the life raft in place with sail ties, which are just links of webbing that are used to secure a sail to a boom. So what you basically have here is that the life raft is completely tied. It has no hydrostatic release mechanism, nothing that would allow the life raft to float free in the event that the vessel sinks. So what you need here is a mechanism, automatic release mechanism utilizing a hydrostatic release as called for by the manufacturer. So what we're looking at here is something from a boat that I surveyed probably 20 years ago. And to this day, it never fails to, one, make me laugh, and two, wonder, shaking my head, what are people thinking when they do something like this? So this is a through hull fitting of a sailboat, a racing sailboat below the waterline. And it still cracks me up. I can't believe it. So, when you a through hull, basically you have a fitting, like a mushroom style fitting with a tube on it, and you slap the through hull into the hole, and on the other side there's a hollow nut that goes on the other side, the body of the through hull fitting, and when you tighten that nut, it compresses against the hull, so the outer flange or mushroom looking, the flange of the through hull fits against the hull, and then the nut on the inside, you tighten it. That's what holds it in place. Well, in some circles or misunderstood circles, I guess, the racers, they think, well, every little protruding bit of material, from the hull, everything that protrudes slows the boat down, and we got to have all the speed we can get, when we're doing our sailboat racing. So what they did was they ground off the flange, the outside flange of the through hulls, so that now, you have this tube sticking through the hull. Yeah, the flange is gone, so you don't have any protrusions to slow the boat down, but you've also got nothing that'll hold the through hull in place. This is another one of the through hulls, and you can see here that the tube or the body of the through hull is starting to pull inside into the hull because there's nothing holding it but the caulking that they use to stick this thing in place. The flange is gone, so now the through hull body of the through hull is going to pull inside. And this is what it looks like when the through hull, the body of it anyway, pulls into the inside of the vessel. So now, if this happens with a through hull that's located below the waterline, of course the boat's going to sink. If this through hull, let's say that it's 6-7 inches above the waterline, well, if that's the case and the body of the through hull pulls in like this, you've got a hole that's located 6 inches above the waterline. You have effectively reduced your freeboard from 3 or 4 feet, which is the distance from the waterline to the rub rail. You've now effectively reduced it to 6 inches, which is where the hole is located above the waterline. So boaters, some of them can be just like any other, activity. Some of them can be a little rednecky, a little MacGyverism kicks in when they need something and they can't find what they actually need. So what we're looking at here is a raw water intake for a engine. You've got the strainer, which is connected to the through hull, that the bronze strainer there, and then connecting the strainer to the engine. You need a piece of marine grade hose to go there, right? Suitable for use below the waterline. Well, we couldn't find any here. And that marine grade stuff, that's so expensive. It's blown out of proportion. Don't really need that. So what we did, we went down there to the AutoZone or the Napa and we got us a radiator hose. It's the same diameter. It ain't quite the same. It's a little big. But we can crimp it on down good with these hose clamps and it'll work just fine. Well, obviously, this is not what you need to use. What you need to use here is a section of marine grade hose suitable for use below the waterline, and this radiator hose is definitely not that type of hose. Okay, so the problem here, you would think is pretty obvious, right? I pointed this out to the owner, and he didn't seem to. It didn't seem to register with him that this was an issue. So we've got an area in the back there. Ethel needs to be able to read her romance novels while laying in the aft stateroom, but there just ain't no reading light back there. So the owner decided he was going to plug in one of these, light bulb socket adapters so you can put a light bulb back there. Then he puts this, 150, 200 watt light bulb, and you can see this thing gets hot. This incandescent light gets hot, and the overhead is actually starting to scorch due to the heat this thing's pumping out. A self-induced fire hazard if there ever was one. It just kind of amazes me. This is common sense stuff, but it just, people kind of gloss over it. They need something, and they do this thing that works, and then they forget about it, right? And this is the end result, the consequences that we have to deal with. So, of course, the recommendation here was to get that light bulb, unplug that thing. If you need a regular reading light, put one back there, wire one in or mount one in instead of trying to do this shortcut. So what we got here is the owner has installed a second battery bank, consisting of a couple of, batteries, and he's installed them a little bit of ways from the other battery bank, and the connections going up to the panel. Well, he started to put the one of the primary conductors, the positive conductor together, and the wire just wasn't long enough. This electrical wire stuff, it's expensive. We can't afford to, go buy another long piece of this big old heavy wire. So what he did was, rather than buy, a marine grade connector, is he put two terminals on it and put a bolt in it, as you can see right here. And then to add insult to injury, he didn't even complete this redneck installation by covering it with duct tape or electrical tape. What could possibly go wrong? You've got, a couple of batteries in a bank, and you're running all of your power through this thing. You've got an exposed connector, and I use that term loosely, that's bouncing around in the bilge. And actually, about a foot or two from this is the gas fuel tank. So, it's arcing and sparking around. What could go wrong? So, of course, the recommendation here, get rid of this and either get a wire of the correct length, a cable, or put a proper, junction splicer box there to connect the two together. So here we've got something I see more often than you would think, and I would like to. We've got kind of a bastardized power inverter installation here. The owner wanted him some of that AC power near the helm while he was underway, and he's installed a small power inverter here. And just looking at this thing, you can see there's a number of issues with it. One, look how he's got it mounted. It's mounted in using a galvanized mounting strap, and it's just kind of loose and flopping around. If you look at the connectors going to it, it's got power coming into it, and then the power continues on some other nefarious function or deed that he's got it wired into. Another issue, there's no switch or any way to secure power to this inverter if something goes wrong. So there's no cutoff switch. Ideally, would have like a battery switch to kill the power to this thing immediately if you needed to. So, if you need AC power, you need a DC or to AC inverter. Follow the manufacturer's instructions to start with as far as installation. Don't just be winging it like this guy did here. And even just looking at the rest of the installation, the wires are kind of loose and flopping around. And if you look up at the top, there are, there's no wire protection, chafe protection for the wire runs where they penetrate the bulkhead. So again, just to reiterate, either study the instructions from the manufacturer and install it in that manner, or hire a marine electrician to install it for you. So we've got a few things going on with this installation here, this Seacock hose installation that should send chills up and down your spine. First of all, the guy's using heater hose, which is not suitable for use on a through-hole fitting, particularly one below the waterline. So when he put this hose in, he discovered that because of the sharp angle here, that, that hose is not reinforced enough and not wire hose or whatever, so it's kind of bending and it collapsed on him. So he got the bright idea that he'd cut the hose and install this 90-degree PVC elbow or fitting into the hose. Well, the problem with that is PVC is another material that should not be used on fittings and through holes and stuff below the waterline. And to cap it all off, he forgot to put hose clamps where the hoses are connected to this PVC elbow. So the recommendation here was, of course, remove this heater hose and PVC fitting and put a marine grade hose, one suitable for use below the waterline. Install that on your Seacock up to this air conditioned raw water pump is what it's going to. Composite to metal fittings or joints are never recommended, particularly where Seacocks and through holes below the waterline are concerned. By composite, I mean a fitting that's made out of plastic or Marlon, something other than bronze or stainless steel, something other than metal. This is especially true of these residential style PVC shutoff valves screwed onto a bronze through hull that the builder has installed in lieu of a proper Seacock. PVC has no business on a through hull fitting regardless of the location above or below the waterline. Metal and composite components have different expansion and contraction ratios, which can result in composite component failure due to cracks or splits. In this case, the PVC valves and components should be replaced with a proper marine grade Seacock. Seacocks must meet ABYC, the American Boat and Yacht Council standards, which include operation of a lever type handle, usually operating through a 90-degree arc that gives a clear indication of whether the Seacock is open or shut, and a mounting that will withstand 500 pounds of force applied to the inner end of the attached fitting. When installing a new Seacock, replacement of the corresponding through hull is also recommended. This to prevent the possibility of thread mismatch between the new Seacock and the existing through hull. Small boats and big engines often equate to major headaches from both a survey and a maintenance standpoint. The more of a pain it is to do maintenance, the greater chance that the maintenance is going to be deferred or not get done. These twin 454 Crusader engines were shoehorned in so tight in this mid-sized powerboat that an average-sized person could barely even stand sideways between them, let alone access components to conduct preventive maintenance or repairs. It's also impossible to physically access the spaces or equipment located forward of and outboard of both engines. The owner commented that when he had to replace the battery charger, which was located on the bulkhead forward of the starboard engine, he hired a 7-year-old boy to squeeze into the space and unscrew the mounting bolts for him. The Cutless bearing, which is shown here, is from a mid-sized power vessel. It was so severely worn that the shaft was actually damaged and had to be replaced. A Cutless bearing is a short metal tube, usually of brass, with an inner rubber lining with multiple grooves running fore and aft of it. The bearing holds the shaft steady as it turns, while the grooves, which run fore and aft of it, allow water to enter the bearing and provide lubrication while the shaft is turning. Cutless bearing replacement is a routine maintenance item. The rubber eventually wears away, resulting in shaft looseness, which, if left unaddressed, can result in a number of problems, from excessive shaft vibration to drivetrain alignment issues. The grooved channels of this bearing are completely worn away, meaning water was unable to enter and lubricate the shaft. No lubrication of the shaft resulted in scoring due to friction and an actual reduction in diameter of the shaft where it passed through the Cutless bearing. Even when a new Cutless bearing of the proper size was installed, the shaft still had an unacceptable amount of play due to the reduction in diameter, which means now you've got to replace the shaft as well. Double hose clamps should only be installed where there is sufficient length of hose barb available, at least 1/4 inch from the end of the hose barb fitting to the second clamp. In this photo, the owner has installed a second hose clamp that extends over the end of the hose barb. Doing so can cut into the hose or force the hose to be internally cut by the fitting, as is shown here. If unable to install double clamps where they are recommended, you need to replace the fitting with one having a longer hose barb or install a single beefier hose clamp of the appropriate size. Double hose clamps should be separated by at least 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch if possible, with the screws located on opposite sides of the hose. So what we have here is a perfect example of why vinyl coated chain is not a good thing to use, particularly in the saltwater environment. The vinyl coating, while it's easier on the deck finish and stuff, it can hide corrosion. The water seeps underneath the vinyl coating and can start eating away at the chain and corroding it, just as is shown here. This is a pretty extreme example of the corrosion that can take place underneath that vinyl coating. A more insidious example would be the corrosion that occurs underneath that vinyl coating, but it is out of sight. In other words, you can't really see much corrosion, maybe a few specks of rust or something in the vinyl coating, while the chain itself is being slowly eaten away. So what we're going to look at in this section are a few owner-induced perversions to the superstructure of a vessel. In this example, you'll see you've got a sailboat that's been raised to the deck level, and we don't really need anything fancy, so we're just going to put this truck camper on top and bolt her down, and it'll be just as good as new. The problem with radically altering the vessel's superstructure is it can become unstable. A perfect example would be shown here, where the owner has added a nice cabin to the vessel, but it is so out of proportion to the hull that the vessel now becomes unstable, particularly in heavier weather. Need another good example? Well, here you go. So the story here is the owner of a recently purchased used boat that I surveyed found what he described as an extra heavy-duty flare gun left on board by the seller. Sweet, this thing looks beefy enough to take down a bull elephant, so it should work just great, he said. I'll just head down to the local S-Mart and buy me some flares to go with it. Had the new owner needed to use his new-to-him flare gun in an emergency, he would have quickly discovered that the flares are incompatible. The flares he purchased are for a 12-gauge gun, while the gun he has is a 25mm launcher. So in this section, we're going to be looking at possible signs that the boat that you're contemplating buying has possibly been submerged or had water trapped in the hull at some point while it was hauled. If you look at this photo here, which is out of a mid-sized sailboat, you can see that the varnish or the wood is damaged up to a point about 7 inches from the cabin sole. This indicates that the cabin has been flooded at some point, and it's very easy to tell in this case, but sometimes it's not quite so easy. There's also a scum line in this photo, although it's not quite as obvious as the previous one. If you look above the hose runs here, you can see the scum line running along the bilge. And in fact, if you look at the battery located in the top right, you can actually see the scum line on the battery itself. So it was about midway of the battery is the height that the water level reached. Extreme mold and mildew would be another possible indication that the vessel has been sunk, or at least partially sunk. And finally, here's another good example of a scum line that indicates that a vessel is either taken on water and sank or partially sank, or in this case, the boat was hauled and the cockpit scuppers were clogged with leaves, so water overflowed and went into the bilge, and this is the level that it got up to before it was discovered.